On this special episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, recorded during the California Ambulatory Surgery Association's September conference in Indian Wells, California, we discuss the conference, meet with Bill Prentice from Asca, and interview CASA Leadership.
Welcome to the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, the longest-running podcast specifically focused on the freestanding ambulatory surgery industry. We would like to thank our sponsors, Surgical Information Systems, providing cutting-edge information solutions for surgery providers. Trivalence. Trivalence offers a comprehensive next-generation ASC solution that optimizes payment and supply chain performance, enabling actionable data insights. And Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, the nation's leading regulatory and accreditation compliance resource for ambulatory surgery centers. For more information about our sponsors, please visit our website at ascpodcast.com.
Welcome to episode 166 of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle for September 19th, 2022, recording from our studio in Spencerport, New York, and from the CASA 2022 Annual Conference in Indian Wells, California on September 6th through the 9th, 2022. This is Sue Cronkite, Chief Researcher for the ASC Podcast with John Goehle and Senior Nurse Consultant for Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. The ASC regulatory environment is extremely dynamic, and the material provided in this episode is based on information available as of the date of recording. Joining me is John Goehle, the owner of Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, and recognized as one of the nation's leading experts in the ambulatory surgery industry. Mr. Goehle is the author of over 10 books on the ASC industry and a frequent industry speaker on regulatory, accreditation, and finance issues.
So I feel like we've spent most of the last 2 or 3 weeks, 3 weeks
We have.
In the studio here between our boot camps and last week we did the finance and accounting. And, of course, I've been on the road with the CASA 2022 annual conference in Indian Wells, California. Unfortunately, you couldn't visit with me. It was quite a trip and very hot out there, Sue. So it's hard to believe even hotter than here. But it was and then I came back with a lot of allergic problems here. But I do want to thank the hospitality of our host out there, Beth LeBoyer and April Leitenberg. They made the whole trip great, if not a little hot, of course. And I was a guest of the association, both for the podcast and for I did a session on a 4-hour boot camp on the first day about finance. So it was a financial boot camp. I think it's about the third time I've done boot camps, finance boot camps for them. And Sue, I had a wonderful audience. I really wish you could have been there for that, because we sometimes are challenged getting people to be interactive during our boot camps virtually, which is very difficult. So it was great to be in person again and to have an audience interact and ask me questions that kept me thinking. As a matter of fact, at the end there, I had to tell everybody I'm going to have to go through some of these slides very quickly because you asked me questions that I hadn't had a slide for, which most people are very grateful for because they really, they want to make these things very pertinent to their jobs. So again, thank you to everybody out in California for the conference. Great conference. I interviewed 3 people during the conference, so we'll get to that in the second section here. So I just want to kind of go over some of the notes that I took from the conference, the different sessions that I attended. I picked up some little tidbits, and these are kind of random. Sometimes in many cases, I'm not even sure who the speaker was for this because I was just taking notes as I went along. Yeah. But the first, one of the opening speakers was Caitlin Zula, and she's the CEO from SCA. Great presentation on kind of what's going on in the industry and a little bit into the future. And she said a couple things that were kind of surprising to me. Like by 2030, California will have the largest shortage of nurses of any state, which I guess isn't too surprising given the size of it. But it just seemed interesting that California of all states tends to have a bigger problem. Yeah. And she didn't have any particular insight, or at least she didn't share with us what her insight was about what caused that. that. And she did mention that nationally they need 1.1 million nurses, and that part of our problem is that we're going to have about 500,000 are expected to retire between now and 2030. So thought that was an expected or kind of a interesting statistic. And just looking at you, because I know you've decided that you want to retire somewhere. Well, you'd like to retire tomorrow.
Yes.
But certainly your intention is to retire before 2030. And of course, you're not in an unusual age bracket for, the average nurse out there.
Yeah.
She also mentioned something that was interesting. We know, and we've been talking about quite a bit about turnover rates. And again, I don't know what the source for this was, but she indicated that in 2021, there was an 18% turnover rate in clinicians. Not surprising given what we have been witnessing among our clients.
Yes, just what we personally see. It is hard to keep people
and
hard to get people. It's just a problem all the way around.
And just in terms of even, leadership positions too, we're seeing I bet that same statistic is holding, at least for our clients out there. Something that's not a surprise, a movement toward more physician employment by the health systems. And she did predict some, major growth in the areas of orthopedics and cardiovascular. Totally agree with her on orthopedics. It's yet to be seen what happens with cardiovascular. Of course, they've been approving procedures for that, but I've yet to see a lot of pickup on that. But I do understand that it could certainly be a growth area in the future, given its movement out of the hospitals into other environments. And then there were quite a number of breakouts that I kind of popped in for at least. I tried to, Sue, when there were like 4 breakouts going on, I, of course, tried to spend a little bit of time in each of them. There was standing room only in the QAPI Studies breakout session. It was there were 4 going on at the same time, and this one was there was no set place to sit. Great session that the speaker talked about, and she suggested that you might not want to be terribly creative in writing your studies, which is interesting because I think kind of our philosophy is we do try to be creative when we're writing our studies, just so that we can, make sure that you have a good explanation of what happened. The smallest group of this particular group of breakouts was for a presentation on workers' compensation claims. And I actually took that as good news. It probably means that this particular woman was talking about workers' comp claims in a surgery center. And I took that as that, probably we don't have a lot of situations where workers' comp claims become a big issue in an ASC. Great presentation on the joint programs. They emphasize the importance of ongoing training between the doctor and the staff. In other words, after you've done a total joint, have a debriefing, you sit down and talk about it, and certainly keep their skills up to date. I think the main reason for that is there's just a lot of ongoing changes that are occurring, especially from a technological and from a supply standpoint there. And then really, as we always emphasize, need for good documentation of the training of any of those quality programs. She also emphasized in this presentation that bundle payments were going to be definitely a big draw for joint programs in the future. And also, I think we've talked about this in a previous podcast about, when you're dealing with joint programs, having a good nursing care team and a kind of a pre-surgical consult with the patients, or help them to prepare for the procedure and the pain and how to deal with it. And of course, as we all know, a successful joint program has to have good screening of the patients coming in. There's only, a certain type of patient that would be appropriate to be allowed that could
that would be able to go right back home again, right?
That's right, exactly right. So I thought it was kind of an interesting. We're talking about invoicing and getting payment for certain insurance claims, and this particular presenter, and again, I'm sorry I don't have all the names of these presenters. I really was just taking notes on the fly, but talking about how implant reimbursement, sometimes the invoices that come from the vendor show that it's part of a kit, and that kit implies that the implant was supplied as part of in addition to other supplies in there, and that they're getting denials right now, rightfully so, I would believe, because the agreement with the insurance company is that they're paying for the implant, not for any additional supplies in there. So be very careful when you're submitting these invoices for reimbursement for the insurance company. If you're lucky enough to have a contract that allows you to charge for the implant, recognizing that if that the word kit is in there, you might get a denial simply because they believe that it's not just the implant that's being invoiced. And also during a presentation about recent denials, there was a comment that pain injections, you have to keep a very close eye on the frequency of those pain injections, especially once you get to upper numbers, 5, 6 injections in a row. And I really would encourage you to think about including this as one of the elements in your peer review process, making sure that whoever's doing the peer review also reviews the frequency and the need for these additional procedures and whether there's any other interventions that might be necessary at this time. Sue, we've been talking a lot about peer review and how we're trying to figure out how to put together some type of an ongoing education program on that. So that I think this is just, again, emphasizing the importance of that. So we're going to take a short break and we're going to come back and we'll have 3 interviews. The ASC Podcast with John Goehle and our virtual conferences would not be possible without the support of our sponsors and patrons. Our goal with this podcast is to help busy ASC executives and staff to keep up with the latest news, learn how to remain compliant with regulations and accreditation standards, and to provide opportunities for ASC leaders to advance in their careers. All of this, of course, costs money, and without our sponsor partners and our patrons, we would not be able to provide this service. Surgical Information Systems was an early sponsor that leads the industry with their software solutions. SIS's mission is to deliver solutions and services that help surgery providers, regardless of care setting, improve their organization so they can deliver the highest level of care to their patients. For more information, visit their website at sisfirst.com. Our newest sponsor is Trivalence. The Trivalence solution is focused on removing waste from the healthcare payments ecosystem by creating the next generation, data-driven supply chain automation and payment optimization portal and infrastructure, saving countless hours, administrative costs, and allowing for scale. For more information, visit trivalence.com. That's TRIVALENCE.com. Our oldest sponsor, Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, is the nation's leader in outsourced regulatory and accreditation oversight. Busy administrators, nurse managers, and medical directors simply don't have the time to keep up with the constantly changing regulatory environment and the requirements of the conditions for coverage and accreditation organizations. AHS helps you to remain compliant for a reasonable fixed monthly fee so you and your staff can focus on taking care of your patients. For more information, visit ah-strategies.com. And last but certainly not least, our patrons. For a reasonable monthly cost, our patrons support the podcast while receiving access to a database of important information, such as policies, forums, drills, and education programs, as well as the ability to meet weekly via Zoom with each other and the staff of the ASC Podcast. Visit ascpodcast.com for more information. Our first interview was with Bill Prentice. He's the Chief Executive Officer for ASCA, the ASC Association. And Bill and I try to talk at least once a year. We're great that we had an opportunity to talk twice this year. Mm-hmm. So he talked about the ongoing trends. This is the first time we had an opportunity to talk after the proposed 2023 payment rule came out. So let's listen to this interview. So I'm here at the California Association meeting in September of 2022, and I'm here with Bill Prentice. He's the Chief Executive Officer at ASCA. And Bill joins us a couple times a year. Thank you, Bill, for coming on the podcast here, talk a little bit about what's going on. Last time you and I spoke, it was before the new payment rule for 2023, the proposed payment rule came out. So can we start by talking a little bit about, what were some of the major events or things that came about in the proposed rule?
Well, thank you, John. It's always a pleasure to spend a few minutes with you and talk about what's going on in the ASC space. When it comes to our proposed CMS payment rule, Medicare payment rule this year, the usual buckets. What are we going to be reimbursed? How are we going to be updated for inflation? What procedures are going to be added to our list? And are there going to be any significant changes to our quality reporting program? Taking first things first, when it comes to payment, we're a bit disappointed in the inflationary update that's been proposed. only 2.7%. For both us and hospital outpatient departments.
Especially in light of all of the dramatic increases that we're experiencing, especially in salary costs or wage costs.
Yeah, exactly. I think we all can see the impact of overall inflation in our personal lives.
Yeah.
And since most, generally medical inflation is higher than overall inflation, a 2.7% increase seems, way too low. So we're obviously going to be advocating for a fresh look at that data and hoping that we get a higher inflationary update by the time the rule is finalized in November.
And you and I were talking before we started the recording here. I've been around a long time, actually in the industry longer than you. And I remember in 2008 when...
Stop bragging.
I know. I don't think it's bragging. In 2008, when we moved to the new reimbursement system, there was a lot of talk about the importance of us being tied to the hospital system. It seemed counterintuitive at the time, but I think we're running into that same situation right now with this the payment rule update.
Yeah, for listeners who have not paid close attention to this, a reminder that this is the 5th year of a pilot program where CMS has been updating ASCs for inflation using the same inflation factor as the hospital outpatient departments, the hospital market basket. Right. Before that, we were being updated using a broad inflationary factor called the Consumer Price Index for urban consumers. And most years, that CPIU would spit out an inflation number that, as I mentioned, would lower than the hospital market basket, again, because medical inflation generally runs higher. This is one of those odd years, though, where probably if we were on the CPIU, we'd get a higher inflationary update than what has been proposed using the market basket. I'd argue, though, that because in most years that is not the case, and because I think being aligned with the hospitals in terms of having an interest in having the best possible inflationary update, having their lobbying power, their market power, working on our behalf in this, to this extent, to try and get a good inflationary update, we're better off staying on the market basket. Right. As I mentioned, this is the 5th year of that pilot, so there is a chance that next year we could be revert back to the CPIU or something even worse, a change CPIU, which is a number that spits out even a lower inflationary number. We're arguing, of course, that because of the pandemic, the last 2 years, volume numbers are suspect. Right. And as a result, they really need more data about this pilot, so they should extend it for at least a couple more years and hopefully extend it permanently, something we're also trying to get addressed legislatively.
And I think another piece of good news right now is that we know the hospitals are not any happier about this low increase as like us.
No, they'll
make a big fight for it.
They have been very outspoken in terms of their concerns about this number, and so to the extent our combined voices through our comments to the proposed rule and things that we're saying publicly lead CMS to make a change and increase that number, I think we'll all benefit, and our patients will benefit as well.
Right. One of the challenges that I think we have right now, one of the things that we've noted, ambulatory surgery centers, we know are a lower cost alternative. Our reimbursement rate is considerably lower than the hospitals, built right into the CMS system. So we've always been making this argument that it's a cheaper place to go. But there has been a bit of a problem with that with regard to the copay cap. Now, we've talked about this before, but I think it bears repeating the importance of moving this. So why don't you talk a little bit about what that is and what we're doing to try to fight it?
Yeah, the copay cap is something that is a complete head scratcher to anybody who spends a couple of minutes thinking about it, which is the copay cap is a law that basically limits what a Medicare beneficiary will pay as a copay when they receive care in the hospital. Right. And so for this year, that's $1,556 is the maximum amount a beneficiary would pay. I think I have that number right. Meaning that it doesn't matter if that procedure you're getting in the hospital costs $30,000 or $40,000, you're not going to pay more than $1,500 some odd dollars as a copay. There is no copay for care being provided to a Medicare beneficiary in the ambulatory surgery center.
There's no copay cap.
No copay cap.
Right.
So what that means is that there's this perverse disincentive now for a Medicare beneficiary where it will cost her more out of her pocket to get a lower cost procedure in a surgery center than a higher cost procedure in the hospital.
Yeah.
So we as taxpayers are being disadvantaged by this perverse disincentive.
Right.
So we're looking legislatively in our ASC legislation to create a copay cap for our setting as well.
Right.
And this matters because, when the original copay cap was established for the hospitals, that was before ASCs were really performing high-cost procedures like total joints and spine procedures with high device costs. Now that we're doing more of those higher-cost procedures, this copay cap has really self-identified itself as a real barrier to care for Medicare beneficiaries that we need to address, particularly those Medicare beneficiaries that don't have like an additional Medigap coverage.
Right.
So this is the lower income Medicare beneficiary, more likely to be a beneficiary of color that is going to be disadvantaged by this barrier, and something we need to get Congress to address.
And we need to make it clear we're in favor of the cap. We just want to make sure it's applying equally to the hospitals.
Exactly. Look, we know that the cost of medical care, particularly for Medicare beneficiaries, is a real stress on them, and so we need this copay cap to apply both in the hospital and the surgery center.
Another thing that was interesting in this most recent one, when I read the proposal, the 2023 CMS proposal, that only one procedure was added this year. Probably I'd have to go back and look at my records, but I think it's the lowest number of procedures added in certainly recent history.
I think that's the case, and we actually had offered up 47 different specific procedures that we believe could be safely performed on appropriate Medicare beneficiaries in the ASC setting. So to have only one of those procedures being added is really just terrible,
especially post-pandemic, when we know that there's a movement already, and especially in other insurance companies from the hospital into the surgery center.
Exactly. And when you see what is moving on the commercial side, particularly in patients near Medicare age, and the things that we're able to do, and so total shoulders, total ankles, there's a host of different procedures that we could be performing that we really need to get added to our list. Right. One of the things that we've seen in this proposed rule, as well as last year's, was a really odd term being raised by CMS, which is the idea that a procedure has to be safe for a typical Medicare beneficiary in order to be safely put onto our list. Since there's no definition, we don't understand what they mean by a typical Medicare beneficiary. That's, we're basically fighting a ghost there, as well as the fact that just goes, completely ignores the whole underpinnings of the ASC model, which is that we use patient selection criteria to make sure that every patient that comes into a surgery center is safe, can be safely seen there, that they don't have comorbidities or other health conditions that would create a higher risk to receive care in an ASC.
And to take the pressure off the hospital so they can focus on the more intensive patients.
Exactly. So this straw man of this typical Medicare beneficiary is something that we need to get them to do away with, because it really doesn't make sense, and I think is really harmful to the growth of the Medicare program and to the ability to use the ASC to save billions of dollars a year. Right. Just to remind people, the fact that we exist as a site of service in the Medicare program saves that program over $4 billion a year. $4 billion that can be used to provide care in other ways and in other settings. So why CMS is not more incentivized to try and drive volume to our setting and increase that number, to create greater savings in the overall program that can be used to provide other benefits and other care in other ways, mystifies me.
And lastly, I think something that both you and I are very passionate about is the leadership challenges that we're dealing with, right? We have a staffing challenge too, but that's a discussion for another day. But what we have found during the pandemic is a lot of retirements of senior nursing and administrator staff, even business office people, and a lot of new people coming into the industry. I've run into a lot of them. I did a boot camp here for the California Association on Finances, which was a lot of fun, but a lot of new people. Some of them coming from outside of the healthcare industry, some of them coming from the healthcare industry, or from education, where they had a lot of education, say on the physician side or in the hospital side, because there really is no education programs in colleges and universities for our type of a setting. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on there and the need for mentoring of our leadership and development of our future leaders here.
Yeah, I think the overall staffing shortage issue that we're seeing and this leadership challenge I think are interrelated.
Yeah.
I think that they are separate to some degree, but I think they are related. I think that this is a problem that has been long in coming, and I think the pandemic obviously really push things a lot faster because of the resignations we've seen, the decisions by people to just throw up their hands and retire. And I think that has led to both an overall staff shortage, but I think we are also seeing a leadership shortage in terms of, where are the next generation of administrators and CEOs of surgery centers going to come from? And are they going to have the breadth of knowledge and training and experience they need in order to succeed and to make sure that our ASCs continue to provide the great efficiencies, the great patient safety, and the great quality that we have come to expect. So, your boot camps, I think our administrator development program is a way to try and address that, so that we can find either new administrators or people who want to become administrators and give them the training and tools so that they can, lead a surgery center and help a surgery center succeed, today and into the future. One of the things that our program focuses on is basically connecting a new administrator or a soon-to-be administrator, a mentee, with a mentor, someone with experience in the ASC setting, a proven record of success that they can turn to, outside of the classroom, outside of the training and sessions, to ask questions of and to get, in
a non-threatening way,
in a very non-threatening way, to be able to, ask the stupid question, right? Yeah. Of course, there are no stupid questions, but sometimes people feel like I think I probably people expect that I know this, and I'll just muddle my way through. Yeah. But now they have a trusted, person they can turn to, ask that question, get the answer, and then obviously, apply that, in their surgery center. So I think it's something that, we have to spend a lot of time and attention on. Right. It's something that's, I think the initial reviews from our program, and I'm sure you're seeing the same with yours, is really positive, and it's something that I think we're going to grow over time, because I think this is a problem that's not going to go away.
Right. And what I love about your program too is that one-on-one mentoring also assists, not only to have somebody ask the questions for, but also to introduce people to other individuals in the industry. So I remember the first time I came 32 years ago to the first Asca conference. I didn't know anybody, but I have no problem going up and introducing myself to any people. Not everybody is that way, and I think this provides a great opportunity during conferences. Just meet them. Exactly
that, because part of our program does involve them coming to our in-person meetings and with that mentor, and then meeting people, and obviously getting the experience of that being live in an ASC environment. We also, though, recognize for some people that's just not going to work. So actually this year we're developing a virtual version of that program. You're still going to have one-on-ones with a mentor and be able to Zoom with them or potentially meet them in person if you're in your area, but allow you to get that education and training in a virtual format rather than in person, if that just doesn't work for you. So now there's two different ways of doing it. It also creates two different opportunities during the year to start this program rather than have to wait a whole calendar year to get started. So this is something that I think is only going to grow. I very much appreciate, the Asca volunteers that are serving as mentors, our education committee, which you've been on, to help develop this program. And I think it's one of the ways we can ensure that the ASC model not just survives, where we are in healthcare, but thrives.
Absolutely. And I think for all of our listeners out there, they need to remember that you're never alone in this industry. I mean, there are no secrets. We share our policies, we share our resources, and we share, our knowledge, through these one-on-one relationships.
I think unlike almost any other healthcare setting, the ASC is a welcoming environment. When you come to any of these meetings, people are so willing to try and help out, answer questions, help each other out. We saw that our last Asca in-person conference, the number of people that asked questions or added to the conversation during sessions was really great to see. And the thing I always just remark upon, because I think we take it for granted, The ASC community is the most optimistic community in the healthcare space.
Isn't that true?
If you spend times in other settings, there's so much negativity and so much, focusing on what's going wrong. The ASC setting, from the physician leaders to the administrators to the clinical staff to everyone, they just have a more optimistic view of where things are heading. I mean, obviously we have plenty of challenges, plenty of problems to overcome. So I'm not trying to, just blue sky this, but overall, I think because we figured out a better way to provide healthcare and to make patients not only get the healthcare they need, but do it in a safe way and in a patient-friendly way, that just leads to a more optimistic view of where things are. And so I just kudos to everyone listening out there in the ASC community, because you've made this the best place to work in the healthcare sphere. And
lastly, I promise this is last, the importance of becoming a member of Asca and, of course, becoming a member of CASA. Here we are at the CASA conference, and the importance of being members of both.
Yeah, look, there are personal benefits to it, because then, as we've been talking about, you get to interact with other people that are experiencing the same problems and challenges you are. So it's going to allow you to do a better job in your work and obviously just access better information. The ability to get the education and training to stay at the top of your field that you can only get at an ASC conference, whether it's a state conference like CASA or any of the Asca meetings or any of our online virtual offerings. And then thirdly, the support you give financially by paying your registration fee for a conference and being a member, your membership dues, are the only way that we can, support the ASC community, that we can afford to hire people to advocate for ASCs in Washington or in state capitals, to put on the education and training, to be able to communicate, what the ASC model is doing to the larger world, whether it's the healthcare media or policymakers or payers. So every dollar that you give to ASCA or your state association is being turned around to support the healthcare model that you're working in, to make your life easier and to make sure that your patients get the care they need.
Absolutely. As always, Bill, thank you so much. Thank you for everything you do for the industry. Obviously, we got a great story. That's why I think we're so optimistic. We have a great story post-pandemic.
Well, thank you, John. You have been a tremendous advocate in the ASC community. The education you provide, particularly on financial issues, is just been outstanding. You've been a great friend to Asca and to me, and I thank you for this opportunity to spend a few minutes with you and your listeners.
Always. Thank you so much.
All right.
And our next interview was with Matt Luke. He's the Regional Vice President for United Surgical Partners International. And he had an interesting presentation on how to bend the recruitment trend. And it's basically about trying to find unique avenues for recruiting new employees. In particular, we talked about recruiting people from the ex-military individuals. And I thought this was a great interview. So I'm here at the CASA annual conference in Palm Desert in September here. And I'm here with Matt Luke from USPI. He's one of the regional vice presidents, correct, for USPI. Matt, we have a challenge right now throughout the industry with finding appropriate staff, educating them on what's different about ambulatory surgery centers, and, of course, being able to supply the services we need to be able to supply to our patients. And you, working with CASA, have come up with some potential solutions or ideas for that. So first of all, give me a little bit of background about you and why you got into this, and then we'll talk about what you're up to.
Yeah, thanks, John. And thanks for having me on the podcast today. Excited to share a little bit about sort of what we've been up to. But by way of background, so I've been in our industry now in ASCs for a little over a year. Before that, I spent about 6 years in the dialysis industry, where I tinkered with a couple of these things that I'll talk about. And before that, 11 years in the United States Marine Corps, where I served as an officer and, as the Naval Academy when 9/11 hit, so straight off to combat and a lot of time overseas. I've been really fortunate to transition into a great industry here at the ASCs and loving what I'm doing.
So how did you get into USPI? Where did you start in USPI?
Yeah, started with what I'm doing now, which is this regional vice president role. I was doing something sort of similar to that in the dialysis industry, and I came over and now support part of SoCal and then the states of Nevada and Wyoming.
So, of course, USPI, just like all of the surgery centers, independent surgery centers, are facing some significant staffing challenges. Talk a little bit about what is up with USPI and that challenge. You're not exempt from it just because you're a big company.
Yeah, no question about it. So, we've got exactly the same challenges as everybody else out there. There's no question, and it's a pretty simple equation in my mind of. The supply is just not keeping up nearly with the demand, right? And I don't think that it's changing anytime soon either.
And it predated the pandemic. It just got worse by the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And so, as I think about this problem, where I sort of start to challenge myself and try to challenge my team is, guys, we got to think differently than we have in the past, right? It's, we've got to do something, the term I like to use is bend the trend, right? We have to do something to sort of bend the curve and innovate to sort of solve some of these issues. And so that's what I've sort of tried to do and had a little bit of success with a couple of different things.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. So our whole conversation really is around the use of veterans in the industry, and certainly your background, is such that you probably recognize right away the nice fit that it is for the industry. I'll tell you a little bit about my experience is I found very early in my career that my best material managers came from the military for obvious reasons. We deal with a lot of products in the surgery center industry, and of course a good materials management person, what do you call them in a military? Sorry, I'm not from the military, so
like supply chain, procurement.
Sure. They made first of all, they had a great work ethic. Second, they were not scared of hard work.
Right.
And third, they were very, very organized, and it worked out very well for us. So I just naturally gravitated toward people that were that had that type of a background. So when I heard what you guys are up to, I thought that it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. And you're right, John. I'm going to talk a lot about veterans at the CASA conference tomorrow, but I'm also going to remind people a lot that the talk I'm going to give is actually, in my mind at least, less about veterans, and it's more about how do you find the people that really have the right core competencies that you're looking for to be successful on your team. Right. And frankly, I've had a lot of success in the past with hiring folks, for example, out of retail. I mean, a couple of my best hires ever came from Target. One of my best leaders I ever worked with was leading a Ross store. Another from the hotel industry.
Right.
And to me, the insight really is around this idea of core competencies. Like what are the things that make you successful in our environment? Right. I think often we index toward, sort of having the industry experience and having those sort of hard skills. Right. But the reality is what makes people most successful is, having a positive can-do attitude, being a team player who's happy to step outside of their lane. And
willing to be innovative.
Somebody who really gets connected to the mission, this heart sort of connection to, healthcare. People that are, sort of there for the right reasons and want to contribute to the team. And I think, we can find those folks in lots of different environments.
Right. Well, and we in the podcast have been really focusing lately on how do we build leadership skills too, because recognize a lot of people are coming into the industry from other industries. Now, usually it's in healthcare, or maybe they're coming out of school with, an MHA or, a health administration program, but that doesn't necessarily make them, a perfect mix in the ambulatory surgery industry, since there's very little training for that, even in college, and especially when you're working at a hospital and transitioning over here. So what do you think are some of those core competencies, and what other areas do you think we should be looking for?
Yeah. Great question. First to me is this idea of, enthusiasm. Really, we heard a speaker earlier talk, what was it? It was a highlighter, somebody who's going to bring energy into the room, pump up the energy, and then after they leave, you still have that energy. And these people exist, and they exist, in lots of different industries, but it's something in their DNA, their personality, right? Their makeup. So that's number one. I think about people who are what I call sort of happy to help, right? What we don't need in our industry is somebody with their arms folded saying, that is not my job.
Right.
Those folks can sort of work
I've never done it that way before.
They can work somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right.
We need people who, our environment is just too dynamic, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to have people who are sort of bridge builders, who are happy to step out of their lane to support, the person to their left and right. And again, I think that there's really a benefit to people that are sort of really deeply connected to the mission that we have at hand. People who get inspired to show up to work because we're going to fix a hip today, and that patient is going to walk today.
Yeah.
So that sort of orientation toward the mission, I think, helps with sort of a longevity. Because that's one of the things that we notice, I think, a lot in this environment is, folks do a lot of job hopping.
Yeah.
I don't want to hire someone who's going to be there for 6 months or 9 months. I want them there for 3 years plus.
Yeah.
Ideally hire to retire. And that's becoming really rare, right?
Well, and that's a really good idea, a good point too to make, is that as we're looking at these resumes, we want to see some longevity there. And if we see it consistent every year, they move on. That's a big downer.
Yeah. And just a point, and you might be asking this question soon, but I just think, it sort of does beg the question, how do you find those core competencies, right? And, and I won't talk about this as much in the meeting tomorrow, but the longer I spend in operations, the more I tend to anchor to this idea that a 40-minute interview ain't enough. Yeah. That's number one. And number two, the sort of questions that we ask really have to get to the core of, how someone shows up in the workplace,
Right.
And sometimes I find myself in the interview process having to say things like, John, I'm going to ask you a question here that I'm asking you to answer in a very specific way.
Yeah.
Tell me about a time, and it has to be a very specific instance in which you actually did this. Put me in the room. I want to see it and feel like how you did this.
Yeah.
Tell me about a time when you went above and beyond for one of your teammates.
Right.
On your own initiative, right? And so getting out of the theoretical answers and into the very specifics of how you do those sort of things, and I just, and I think, a second and third and fourth interview with key members of your team, it makes a lot of sense. I think having them walk through the center and touch and feel the place so that they're coming totally clear-eyed around what they're getting into is so important. So I just wanted to sort of share those things as well.
Well, it's interesting. As we're recording this, we're coming off last week's 4-day Bootcamp, Administrators Bootcamp. And one of the sessions that we do is on strategic planning. And one of the discussions that we had there is, as you develop your strategic plan, your mission, and your core values, you need to make sure that you shout those out. And we talked about those core values that you establish need to be part of your recruiting period. In other words, you immediately, to your point, we generally have about 5 or 6 core values like enthusiasm and, teamwork, things like that. You want to make sure that everybody that you recruit has those core attributes and agrees with those. Of course, you have to sneak around a little bit, try to figure out whether they truly exhibit it or they're just giving you something to get the job. But I think you got a good point there that it's important to consider additional interviews before you actually hire somebody wrong.
Yeah, quick, just to add on to that, just to say, I think this is sort of an interesting interaction I just had over lunch with somebody. She said, Matt, I brand new administrator with USPI.
Yeah.
And she said, Matt, I interviewed ultimately with more than 10 people. Mm-hmm. And I said, I asked her, did you experience that to be a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah.
And she said, I loved it.
Oh, wonderful.
I loved it.
Yeah.
And I shared back, I had a similar experience and I also loved that. Because I was so clear-eyed around what I was getting into. I had every question asked and answered, right? I knew all of the things that were going to be great about the job and the things that were going to be pretty tricky for me.
Right.
And I also knew all of the people I'd worked most closely with. There wasn't some jerk hiding under the hood that I knew nothing about, right, when I took the job. And so, I think it can be interesting. Now, I do think as a hiring manager, you want to be really clear about, if you have a process like that, sort of the why.
Right.
And So, that's one of the things that I tend to do is to just share that up front. Like, hey, it might be a little bit of a longer process, but let me help you understand why I think that's so important and why I think it'll actually really benefit you in the long run. And I think it's okay for it to be sort of challenging to join your team if you're that intentional about who you bring on.
Yeah, as long as you have the time to be able to do that.
Yeah.
We got places right now that are so desperate for people. Unfortunately, they end up not being a very good situation if you hire everybody that you have and then
That's right.
just hope that they're going to work out. It's not a good solution at all. So, man, I know tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp, after the big party tonight, that's going to be interesting, right?
Nobody in the room.
That's right. You're going to talk about the Veterans Program that I know you're excited about. Certainly, I spent a lot of time with Beth talking about this. I know she's excited about it. It sounds like a great opportunity. Tell me a little bit about what this is all about.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, noticing some of the challenges we had around, the labor market, I started to sort of challenge myself on this idea of sort of the core competencies that really make an outpatient surgery center work best. And as I started to contemplate these competencies, it occurred to me that many of the Marines I used to work with would probably be a pretty darn good fit, right? Yeah. And then I thought, gosh, I wonder what we're doing for veteran transitions in our space or veteran spouses. And because, of course, there's a lot of programs to help them out with this sort of thing. And maybe I could be helpful in sort of, creating that bridge. So I talked to Beth at CASA, and we actually, created a veteran committee this year, which is super cool.
And I know the veterans that register, they get a little, that's great recognition that they have a little tag on
this year. Yeah. And so I started placing some phone calls to a lot of my buddies. Of course, I live in San Diego, a whole bunch of bases around there, and all my friends now are battalion commanders and stuff that are still active duty, and I've got a lot of friends in the sort of transition space in the nonprofit world and some government agencies, and they all were pointing me toward the same thing. They'd say, Matt, there's a new program that exists now that didn't exist when you were in. It's called Dod Skill Bridge, and that is the easy button on all of this. Yeah. And so Skill Bridge is a program where for a transitioning veteran, so if they're active duty, their command can give them approval for a 12-week internship, all expenses, paid, to go, intern at some place, back in their hometown. Wow. And if it turns out to be a good fit, wonderful. You can maybe give them a job offer on the back end, right? And so it's a 12-week program for the vets, and then a 6-week program for any military spouses.
Oh, wow.
So that is sort of how the Skill Bridge program is designed. Now, there's a nonprofit that basically serves as the operations arm of Skill Bridge, and it's called Hiring Our Heroes. So Hiring Our Heroes is really where you want to reach out to. Okay. And you can go on their website, and it's super easy to get connected to sort of the regional managers there. The one that the woman I work with on the West Coast, her name is Melinda Gomez. And what they do is they just publish a list of service members and or spouses, and veterans too. There are people, you can do it as a veteran. But they'll publish a list on a quarterly basis. And you get this list in your inbox, and man, if you're looking to hire some talent, it feels like Christmas. Yeah. Because you open it up, and it's very easy to sort of sort through in terms of where people live, where they want to go, what their interests are, what their background is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And so, what I did was I reached out, I sort of culled through the list, and anyone who's interested in anything ops related or healthcare, certainly, obviously, I reached out to probably 30 or so people, heard back from probably 2/3 of them. Oh, wow. And set up quick phone screens with like 15. And I'm telling you that I would have loved to have hired 80% of them, right? And I thought, man, that was sort of easy. Yeah. And so we actually did start with one. And so we've hired somebody as a sort of a unique role called a business office coordinator at one of our centers. And, it seems to be, going along okay. And we're learning some things from it. But I think it's just a really, really cool, just talent rich sort of easy pool to tap into, which is which is pretty neat. Now, I say that, and I know, realizing the audience here, everyone's saying, Matt, how many nurses are there? Yeah. There's not enough right now, and Hiring Our Heroes knows that. And in their world, most of the nurses come out of the Navy in Southern California.
Okay.
And so it's a matter of getting in deeper to Balboa and then the Camp Pendleton Naval Hospital. It's something that's like priority one for them right now, because they realize how the candidates. So this was new for them too, Hiring Our Heroes in this ASC thing, right? And so they heard on their end how excited all of the candidates were to have a better understanding that, man, I could go work in healthcare.
Right.
I didn't realize that, And the truth is, I mean, there's just countless numbers of these folks that would be fantastic in our business offices or coming in as techs. And then, of course, as we get a better connection to the nurse world, and the leaders too. I mean, gosh, I interviewed a couple of folks that were transitioning officers that had really compelling leadership backgrounds that would make awesome administrators, And so it's just a really cool talent resource that's pretty darn easy to work with. That's just, I think, another lever that we can be pulling.
Well, and especially, I was just talking to Bill Prentice just before I interviewed you about, we have the Administrators Bootcamp. He has the Administrator Mentoring Program with Asca. We were talking about how the programs are so necessary right now. There's a lot of people out there. They don't have to be in healthcare to be able to transition into that.
That's right.
It's a great background to start out with, but I can't emphasize enough the great thing about hiring people from the military is that work ethic that they have. It's a great start for it. So I think this sounds like a great program. And I think a point that I think you also made too is that you don't necessarily have to work at a community. I mean, it's great if you're in a community that has a military base, but of course, all the people that are recruited to the military come from all over the country.
You're spot on. Yeah. So, one of the centers in my geography is Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and I think a lot about the young Marine who lives in he's from Jackson and wants to get a good job, and I'm in Jackson all the time because of the surgery center up there, and I'll tell you that surgery center's got to be one of the best places to work in town, and to be able to get connected to Phil Ramsey up there, and to be able to build that relationship on the government dime. I mean, man, that's a pretty special deal on both sides.
Yeah, this is great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I look forward. I probably have to listen quickly to your speech and catch a plane, but this has been great. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, John. This is fantastic.
Great.
Appreciate the time.
And our last interview, and certainly not the least, was with my dear friend Beth LeBoyer. She is the executive director for the California Association, and she's responsible for pulling all of this stuff together. So we had a great discussion about the California Association. It's our first time, Sue, that we were able to get together and talk since the pandemic. You might remember that we were out. Was that up in Monterey? I think it was in Monterey.
It was.
Yeah, when we had an opportunity to interview her and interview a number of people. So let's listen to this interview where we talk about the state association and the activities over the last couple of years. So I'm so happy to be here at, what annual conference is this, by the way?
Oh, gosh, I had to do the math, but I believe it is 35.
Oh, my heavens.
Yeah.
35 years. And I'm so glad to be here in person again. The last time I was here was 2019.
I know.
Yeah, it was 2019.
Yeah.
Heavens. So I'm here with Beth LeBoyer with the California Association. And thank you so much for inviting me out here. And I had an opportunity to speak on one of your pre-opening conferences. You had a great turnout.
Oh, John, it was our pleasure. And we're so thrilled you joined us. Gosh, I've heard nothing but such positive comments from your session on the financial overview. And I think with all the turnover in the industry and or just some, need for, looking at that again. Yeah. And even a lot of veterans wanted to say, hey, I want a refresher. So thank you for making that great.
I got to say this, too, because after 2.5 years of COVID and a lot of virtual conferences where we're not getting a lot of feedback, your audience was tough on me. I mean, and this is great. They asked me some tough questions. I think you were coming in at the end there as I'm trying to scramble to get the material done. And I made a couple promises to people that I hope I can meet to make sure I give them the material I missed out.
Yeah.
But it was a great opportunity. So, we've done a couple interviews. I was able to interview Bill Prentice from Asca. Was just before the new 2023 payment rule came out. So we had a great conversation there. But we need to talk about CASA. Okay. And tell me what's going on with the association, the benefits, your membership here. You are truly one of the strongest associations. Bill and I agreed on that. Nationwide, and certainly in terms of size, I think you're the largest. I'm not quite sure the math on that.
Yeah,
I don't. Certainly, as a percentage of the number of surgery centers, I think you're right up there.
Yeah.
And so, great job that you've been doing. So, but why do people join you? Why do they join a state association?
It's tough out there, and that's our mission. And I always kind of try to take our mission and put it down to we must be members of CASA.
Yeah.
And that's our vision, is that we just really help surgery centers in California, because it's tough out there.
Yeah.
It's a tough labor market. It's tough, coming out of COVID, the regulatory, and that's what CASA is here for, to help them navigate through some of those difficult waters.
I did a slide. I put a slide up on the screen that put down $35 an hour as the average nursing salary.
Oh,
they laughed me off the stage. I mean, I recognize it. It's those are East Coast numbers, and not even in the big city on the East Coast. But yeah, you've got a tough labor market. We're all going through significant shortages right now, and of course we've all been dealing a lot of your conference. I noticed a lot of conversations in the conference today, a lot of sessions about leadership, developing leadership skills. Developing your staff, finding ways to keep your staff happy. And that, I think, has been the highlight of this conference, and a real major need out there. And when I watch the emails that I get daily, it seems, from you, you as an association are really making an effort to keep the membership up to date, to assist people in, getting the resources in the right place.
Yeah, we were very intentional with that agenda.
Yeah.
Just, you look at all the new administrators out there.
Yeah.
Or people taking new roles in the ASCs. And so we felt like giving them skills for leadership.
Right.
And then, of course, the labor market, and looking at all the different things that you need to do to have that strong staff, because it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough out there. And I think we have to look at things differently than we used to.
Right.
So I'm excited. We've got tomorrow, on our session tomorrow, is really going to focus on that. And I'm really excited for those sessions.
Now, during the pandemic, you and I probably spoke more than we ever did in the years before that, because organizations like ours, the podcast, of course, the state associations, many of the state associations, certainly yours, really geared up. I mean, probably some of the busiest periods in your life, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
And what do you think, what did you learn from the pandemic about services that you as an organization can offer to your membership? Because I think you've evolved. I look at the services that you're offering now, it seems to have evolved. Your newsletters are a lot more information there.
Yeah, it was, we really had to be just like surgery centers, or nimble. I mean, gosh, we were speaking daily, right? When you think of March of 2020, and every day what's going on, and trying to get consistent information, and every day it was something new. And so we really made an effort to just be on top of that for our members. And then, of course, we had to pivot for our annual meeting back then. So we were able to just really pivot fast and go to weekly webinars, just because we felt like that was what our members needed.
Right.
And I think we just, as we transitioned through that, learned what our members needed, and, kind of kept an eye on that. And that's what, when you say we have transitioned or changed things, just surgery centers, it is tough out there. Yeah. And they don't always, it's all, the hospitals get a lot of the focus with their dealings with COVID, but surgery centers really have a lot of needs that direction too.
So I'm a brand new administrator in a surgery center in California. What does the membership do for me in the state association? What advantages can I have? Especially, so many of them are coming into it
not from internal. Sometimes they're coming from an outside world. Or even if they're coming internally, they have no clue the regulatory environment.
You know, it's funny you say that, John, because I always use my own personal experience. And we're talking quite a few years ago, but I transitioned from the hospital OR to running a surgery center to I was supposed to be running clinical, and I was immediately running the entire surgery center, not in my skill set. And I went to my first CASA meeting probably 3 months into my position. And the members just kind of took me in, and the networking, and I learned so much. And what I also learned is my situation was not uncommon. And I still see that today. So as executive director of CASA, that's what I want to make for all of our members is, gosh, if they have a question, they call, they speak to somebody in person, they get an answer right away. If we don't know the answer, we connect them to someone in the industry and have that networking component and those resources to run a surgery center. Because it's interesting, but it's not a unusual story that you don't have that MBA or all that stuff behind you to run a surgery center.
And just for our listeners, and we have our Patron Program too. We actually have, I think, a couple regulars from California that join us on Saturday mornings, which, by the way, since it's 10 o'clock our time on the East Coast, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. And of course, bless all of those Bootcamp members who join us at 6 o'clock your time, but the question often comes up, what happens in California? The first thing I always say is call Beth. And then when they say who Beth is, then I send them your membership form because you've always been great to us. When we have a question and we need some information, you go right to the source with you guys, and I appreciate that. What do you do to become a member? And
it's pretty easy. We have our website, and you can join on the CASA website. You can actually reach out to us personally. We'll help you.
You actually do answer the phone.
I answer the phone. We all three of us. We have April and then Nicole, who is our brand new, just started this week, membership manager.
Oh, wonderful!
So
what a week to start.
I know. I feel. I said this is probably the worst week for you, but I'm really excited what she can bring for us to help with that as well.
Yeah.
But membership, you not only get all those resources, the networking, the newsletters, free benchmarking, all of those things that help you run your ASC. And then this CASA conference.
Yeah.
It's just so energizing. It's so much fun. You come away with.
We have a party tonight in a few
ideas.
hours.
Yeah. It's a great community.
It was interesting. I was walking around the vendor, talked to a lot of vendors because it seems like I know virtually all of them here. And I asked how many of them are coming to the party tonight. And I'd say more than 3/4 of the vendors I talked to, of course, maybe it's because the vendors I talked to are party animals like me. I don't know. But it's interesting that's you don't always see that at Asca, at the national conference, that people are that engaged that they want to go to the parties. And of course, that's a great way to get to know other people.
Right.
And I've been seeing that a lot, just walking around, people introducing themselves and handing cards back and forth. It's great to be back in person.
Yeah, there's such good camaraderie. And we're actually higher attendance than 2019. So
that's great to hear.
Just very exciting.
What's your next conference?
It'll be in Monterey. In September.
The annual conference next September, right?
Yes. Oh, the annual conference. And then we also have our virtual infection prevention seminar. And then we're working on some, just virtual webinars, Board of Pharmacy, all those things that we have, questions with. And, of course, like I said, with the virtual and everything changing, we're able to put on a webinar and say, oh my gosh, we need this. Let's talk about it. We can't wait. We need to address this issue.
Absolutely. And lastly, I did have a chance to interview your legislative people. So you can just give a brief view as to what CASA is doing on the legislative front, what services you provide to your members there.
Well, we're always working on the legislative front because, the surgery center industry is growing.
Yeah.
It's becoming more and more on the radar or being integrated in the healthcare delivery. So it's important that we're at that table.
Right.
And we work very hard to make sure our legislators know what surgery centers are.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many of them don't know. So, and it's a constant education because there's so much turnover.
Yeah.
But with procedures driving to surgery centers, that's so critical because if they don't understand this, they're going to make some decisions that are not going to be good for surgery centers or for our patients.
Right. And the patients are, of course, the thing that's really driving the message right now.
Yeah.
Post-pandemic, certainly on the East Coast, where I spent most of my time, hospitals, they wanted to get rid of those cases for, certainly during the pandemic. Now they're starting to wonder as to whether they made a mistake. Yeah. But definitely we need to.
Well, I think that's what the pandemic did. It took ambulatory surgery and accelerated they saw how it could be successful.
Right.
It's kind of like telemedicine got totally accelerated, right? And they're like, okay, it should have been something evolving already. So I think the value there and the appropriate site of service.
Yeah.
Because, if you can have surgery in an environment that all they do is surgery, it's less expensive. You have less chance of infection, and you have quality outcomes.
You're not going to meet a patient with COVID. And,
right.
Well, and having both of us came from the hospital industry, they should be taking care of the COVID patients. They should have the resources to be able to do that. That's one of the things I've been talking about on the podcast here is how, we're right back to 100% occupancy in many of our East Coast hospitals. I don't know how it is in the West Coast, but that's not where we should be. We should be during the summertime before the flu, season comes. We should be at 80%. And we as taxpayers should be comfortable paying for that, knowing that the hospital's there for those other times. But if we're 100%, that means right now that there's some room for bringing some additional things over to the surgery centers.
And I think the hospitals are thinking about that business model too, and the appropriate site of service. So it's good. It's a good relationship. I mean, I think there's always fear with the business and all of that, but there's increased partnership.
Right.
And healthcare's expensive. So it's important that we look at doing things, I don't want to use the term progressive, but the right patient at the appropriate site of service.
Absolutely. As always, Beth, it's great talking to you again, and hopefully I'll be back here next year. And we'll get this published shortly so that the rest of the people that couldn't make it down here could hear what a wonderful job you did this year.
Well,
so
thank you, John. And thanks so much for making our conference great.
Oh, my pleasure.
It was a great way to start off our meeting, so really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle is sponsored by Surgical Information Systems, Trivalence, and Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. Surgical Information Systems provides cutting-edge information solutions for surgery providers. Trivalence offers a comprehensive next-generation ASC solution that optimizes payment and supply chain performance, enabling actionable insights. Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies is the nation's leading regulatory and accreditation compliance resource for ambulatory surgery centers. For more information about our sponsors, visit our website at ascpodcast.com. This podcast is an educational and operational tool and is not intended to be a comprehensive resource for all rules, regulations, and standards that an ambulatory surgery center must meet. The advice provided should not be considered as, nor does it constitute, legal advice or opinion. When reviewing specific situations involving legal and regulatory issues, attorneys and other professionals should be consulted. This has been a production of Eden Group Development. All rights are reserved. If you are interested in advertising or sponsoring the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, please email us at info@ascpodcast.com. We would love to hear your questions and comments. Please email us at comments@ascpodcast.com.